But I'm Denise.
I'm Christy.
Christy and Pam, you want to give us a wave there? Pam, she's our guest speaker for tonight. Christy and I are in Thunder Bay, and as always, we're on the traditional territory of Fort William First Nation, or an MPYU, and the signatory to the Robinson's Bay Treaty of 1850. Just got in from work, heard an alumni tonight speak about her experiences as an Indigenous a high school student who was homeless and actually kept her clothes in her locker and had a shower at school. She said to the group, I don't know how I made it through high school, but school was always a safe place for me to go. And so in actual fact, she was living out of the school and then sleeping outside. So that was quite powerful to hear tonight, her journey, that she's a practicing lawyer now. She just graduated. And, you know, she said the commitment to helping other people really has what's kept her moving forward. So anyway, that was just a little beginning when I think about relationships and the importance of relationships, and how for this woman who now has 3 children of her own and was probably in her early 40s, you know, when she was a youth in high school, it was relationships at school that actually kept her coming back to school, and she could have easily gone so many other places. Christy, any thoughts? Pam?
It's been a long week for us here in Thunder Bay, and it's only Wednesday. And I guess in terms of relationships today, and I'm gonna think about a young man who's sadly not with us as of Monday, but that was at my school for 2 years with his brother, and we had a really close relationship. And I guess it leaves me wondering how much more we can do. So here we are today, hopefully learning more about what we can do next.
Okay, and Pam, we've known for quite a long time. Pam comes from the North Shores of Lake Superior. I used to work with her sister Paula, who lives now in Thunder Bay. And Pam is a vice principal in Peel, is it?
In York Region.
York Region. Okay, small, but big school. But worked also as a coach and a lead instructor for the school board for a number of years. Did a lot of provincial work in mathematics, and you're now living in the world of 9 to 12, eh? So,
you bet. Yeah.
Anyway, Pam also teaches AQ courses online around working with Indigenous students and content, and I would suppose reconciliation is probably part of that in terms of learning for everybody. But anyway, thank you, Pam, for joining us. And we'll turn over to you.
Awesome. Thank you for having me again. It's always fun.
That's my favorite.
You see people walking by. Sorry. Did you want me to talk a bit about what I'm doing like now? And okay, there we go. I got you now. We're usually beside each other and eye contact works, but I can't see your eyes very well today. So I'm currently in the role of vice principal at a secondary school in the northern part of our board. Our board spans over a massive geographical area. I believe it's the 3rd largest board in the province. Moved into the role new this year. I believe that I am probably the only Anishinaabe vice principal in our system. So that speaks to where we need to move in terms of hiring practices, I think. I'm originally from Sault Ste. Marie. My community is Batchewana First Nation, just outside of Sault Ste. Marie. And I am a visitor in this territory, which is part of the Williams Treaty. And I treat myself and conduct myself in a way that is respectful, that this is not my home territory. So I guess I kind of behave like a cousin and a visitor. And I have really good and strong relationships with members of Georgina Island First Nation. And I just love hanging out with them because I'm not close to my home. So I treat that space as my second home, and my relationships are very much like family. I do rely heavily on my relationships and essentially do this because I have a good relationship with both Christy and Denise, and I feel like they're like 2 decolonizing sisters in this wonderful world of education that we all work in, and try to disrupt the way that we do things and interrupt to basically make our spaces braver and better for all students. Yeah. And in this new role, I have definitely learned that my relationships are still key. So not being in the lead role of Indigenous Ed, I have really shifted what the idea of a vice principal is in a secondary school. and have essentially then earned the respect and admiration of students and families in our community, because I think in the past it's been a space of triaging behavior, and now it's more in a space of safety, where students who are feeling hijacked first thing in the morning can come and share what's happening with them, and they know that I'll support that with them in the school day for them, because sometimes kids just can't unpack their backpacks before the school day starts, and they can't function within the structure of that day. So those are kind of high priorities for me.
Question for you, Pam.
Mhm.
You mentioned that you're rethought the role and are maybe, there's been times I think where we've all gone into jobs. I remember my own grade 7 first experience. I'm thinking, oh God, I have to teach it this way. And then I went and I'm like, oh no, I just came out of grade 1. And those grade 7s really needed the exact same thing the grade 1s did, just a little more and less of things. And they were just bigger than me instead of smaller than me. So how did you find maybe similarities and differences to how you worked as a teacher, and then how you worked into not the principal of the school, but a vice principal of the school, where you're not actually the final say on things? How did you navigate that relationship with your school principal, and then be sandwiched between chairs of departments and teachers?
That's a great question. So I always operate on the premise of observing. I observe a ton. I try to get to know people and understand how they function. My experience before I was the lead for Indigenous Ed was I had 10 years as the subject head of alternative education. And we had the largest department in the board. It essentially was its own school. We had 72 sections. And so thinking about programming outside of mainstream programming is definitely a strength that I brought to that team. I essentially spent the first 2 months asking a lot of questions. So, and the questions were kind of like, I'll give you specific ones. How we operate with substitutions when I was an alternative head was essentially, we wanted the kids to graduate. We have 3 substitutions for secondary. We're going to use all 3. When I moved into a new space where I wasn't in charge, it was, what is your philosophy around substitutions and how do you use them? Specifically, I was looking at French, because if students were struggling with English as their first language, and then we were adding a second language onto their plate, we're not setting them up for success, where that might be a better space for a class that would engage them or get them to think about the pathway that they're on. And so I literally would ask those questions, like, what is your philosophy on this policy? And do you operate in the gray within this policy and procedure? And I really took 2 to 3 months to get to know my principal and how he operates, but then kind of showed him glimpses of how I operate and the knowledge that I brought to the team. I think personally, I experienced a little bit of challenges in the fact that I had a pretty big reputation when I came into that space, and he had never worked with me. And because I was afforded opportunities to share learning with senior team, I had relationships that he didn't have, which I think if you are above somebody in that hierarchical structure, it would be super intimidating. Because the superintendent I had when I moved to a school was my former superintendent as Indigenous Ed lead, and we had each other on like cell phones. Like we would text and ask questions, where like they weren't even on a texting relationship yet. So stuff like that could be scary for other people. But in those 2 months, I had a really good mentor, because in our board we have a 2-year mentor that supports our transition into the role. And I was intentionally paired, thank goodness, with a racialized former principal. And so when I would surface things I was seeing that were playing out in our space, he would be like, no, you're right, this is what's happening. And then this is how I handled it when I was in the role as a Black man. So I think that your relationship piece is so essential to your growth. And it's good to know that, for me, it was good to know that I wasn't the only one experiencing that, and I was able to name that and articulate where it was coming from, but then how to then work through it. And so I think now, like, I'm in a space where I almost feel like I've transformed my team, like unintentionally, by just allowing all of them to kind of see who I am, see how I've kind of recreated what I believe the role of vice principal in that building to be, and how that actually works for students and not against students. And I see both of them shifting how they talk to kids now. And I don't mean that like in a way like they weren't talking appropriately. I just mean that the conversations now start with, how is your day going? How did your morning start? And really trying to get to the bottom of maybe why that student might have got kicked out of that same first period class at the start of the day for something that probably wasn't really starting there. It started like 3 hours before everyone else moved, right? But yeah, I think spending the time to get to know who your team is, and for me, I know where I can push and where I just can't push. So just knowing your limitations. But yeah, you have no power. Like I feel like you essentially like you have power, but for me, I use that power to leverage kids' opportunities. But I don't use that over people,
Yeah.
which I think had been done not with this particular admin team in place, but with former admin teams in that building. I think that it was definitely a positional power thing. Like, I'm in charge and this is what you do, but that's not how our team functions at all.
Any questions for Pam? Yeah, so I was thinking about when you talk about sort of thinking the role, Pam, one of the difficulties I think, if you've not come from a racialized space, so if you're white, like me, one of the difficulties is recognizing that happening. And where as you said, you could see where it was happening, where it was coming from, and then you do need to just work through how to deal with it. I think one step back, how do you help others recognize where that is happening who maybe haven't experienced it or don't look at it or look for it?
Don't notice it.
Yeah.
So for me, I think like essentially I needed to understand what that looked like in the context of the body I'm in. And then working beside people who are of the dominant identity, like supporting their eyes to almost be opened. So I can remember a specific time where we had 3 individuals involved in an incident, and one of the individuals was racialized. And I had been part of the investigation with the other 2 individuals who were not. And when that parent came, like I kind of was like a little bit, I don't ever feel like 3 administrators should be in those meetings. I feel like it's intimidating for parents. So I just kind of, I back off. I guess maybe that might not be a good thing, but I just feel like it's too many people. So I didn't go in. But I did say hello to the mom when she walked by. Like, I'm just always like super welcoming. And when they both came out of the meeting, they're like, we're going to get accused of racism. And then I just kind of, when I want to say something, like I get this nervous laugh. And so I was just like, oh yeah, whatever. And then they said, just say it. And I said, well, that's a good opportunity to bring in the brown girl who can help you kind of navigate that conversation and speak to the pieces that maybe you're not getting. Like, because you're super structured that maybe you're missing the social emotional connection to the conversation, or the validation of how that parent is feeling, or like those pieces. And so I've used those moments to kind of show them that there's not value to me being on the team, that I can demonstrate and show that to them. And there were a couple more incidents where I pushed back, like I didn't just accept a decision that they made on something, and I kind of pushed them to think outside of that that almost mainstream thinking of this is the policy and the protocol that I'm going to follow. These are the steps 1 through 5. I did 1 through 5, so now this is my action. And how to think about their identity has to come into play in that decision, and what impact does that identity have on the decision that you're going to make. So I used moments to kind of open their eyes. And because it's it's a bit of a bigger push in our board, because we just released our Indigenous Education and Equity Strategy, which is part of now our board plan. People are starting to think about power and privilege and how that plays out in spaces, and it's now part of their school improvement plans, which it was there, but just as a foundational piece, not necessarily as like a hyper intentional focused piece. And now people have to, because it's part of our plan. So that kind of helped shift that. Can you hear the people behind me?
A little bit, but not too bad.
Okay. No, it's okay. They just got there. So I'm gonna move. There's a quieter corner over here. I just realized how loud they were.
If any of the students have a question for Pam before we move on to another related, feel free to ask. So yeah, just unmute yourself if you have a question.
Hi, Pam. I have a question.
Sure.
Okay. I work in a First Nation school, and I've been there. This is my first year here, but I was there like 10 years ago. But I've always worked in First Nation student success in our Indigenous communities. And I have a question. Like, is it hard to find qualified First Nations staff to work in your provincial school boards as well? Because we have at, like here in Kenora, in our area?
I think I don't know if it's as much as hard to find them that our processes aren't set up in a way that allows them to share their gifts. Like, I think that it's such a colonial process that we structure these questions and we grade people based on how they talk and their intentional educational vocabulary, but not necessarily like as Indigenous people, like we action things. And we're so ridiculously humble that we don't talk about it in a way that we're bragging about it because it's just good work and it helps kids. And if you could, like, it's almost like it would be better if part of the process was follow me for a day and watch how I interact with kids and families, because then you'll get a good sense of who I am. But I think that process kind of impedes us from hiring us because we just don't play into that system well. That's just not how we function or who we are.
Right. Because like I said, I've worked in my First Nations community this year, and everything you're saying I can relate to, like with the students, and really build those relationships and realize that they're not coming to school, just coming to school. Like there's so much more things on their plates before they even come to school in the morning.
Yep, agreed.
So
and
just,
most of them are like adults, like our kids in the community I'm working in. I call it a bedroom community because everyone travels out of the community to work. And yeah, it's only like, I don't know, like 50 minutes north of Toronto, but it's still kind of isolated where it is. And so kids that are 15 are getting home to get the elementary kids. So they're skipping period 5 because they have to be home to receive the younger kids. And so we're looking at, is our system, like as a structure of our school day, really supporting our learners? And how do we adjust it so they can be home but not miss a period? So, you know, like you're right, it's about relationships with kids and families first.
Yes. Thank you.
Any other questions? Kathy, Sarah, or Jared? Okay, another question for Pam?
Well, I was just thinking, I don't know if it's a question. We'll probably start a discussion about it. Denise Brown, she's out of Brock University. I don't know if you've ever met her. She's writing on leadership, but one of the sort of her focal points is on managing micro and macro politics in boards. Yeah, how principals, vice principals navigate those spaces. So micro, she tends to is like the school itself. That's the micro, and even the board to some extent. And macro is the board system, and then provincial. You talked a little bit about how you navigate that. I'm thinking in terms of. So I just asked you a question about pushing, administrators, but how do you help push teachers into that space out of curiosity? And then how do you talked very specifically about coming from a space where you had a lot of, well, quote, power, because people saw you with the superintendents and saw that sort of relationship piece. And that certainly has as you said, an intimidation factor. So, besides listening and then asking some questions, can you talk about some other things you do to help get teachers thinking that way and moving that way?
So when I moved to a school, like I watched, I was in the halls, I was like going into classrooms when kids weren't in them and teachers were working in their classrooms and kind of getting to know the lay of the land and who were the leaders like within the school, and who kind of had knowledge that could almost help me push my agenda. Like, because every administrator has like their own agenda that they want to see come to fruition, like in a building. And I literally spent the first 3 months figuring out who my people would be and to push that. So I found like the ringleader essentially, and she was amazing and knowledgeable and had felt silence like in the past. And so was sent to like equity learning, but then when came back was afforded space to kind of share the learning so that the other staff members could learn about it. And then I said to her, we need like a small crew. We need 2 more people on our team. Who can we get? And she said, let me sleep on it. And so she had brought together like 2 more people. And one, she was brilliant because this person has a lot of clout like in our building and people will listen to him. And so, hi, Bryn. And so they, the way that she brought this team together, and then we intentionally signed up for professional learning. So that group is doing inclusive design professional learning. We do it together. And that's the group that's looking at the structure of the school day. They want to go there first because they think they need a little more time for learning for themselves on how their identity informs their work, so then they could then share that out with the staff and think about how that can challenge their pedagogical practice at this point. And so that's why we went at structure first, and they're learning, and they are growing so much in their learning, and they have initiated amazing things in our building. And like we we're flying the pride flag for the first time in the history of the school, and the school's been up for 15 years. And they supported the conversations that had to happen to do that. So I call them mini Pams because they're growing still. And I did that like actually in front of like 100 colleagues that were in this inclusive design when I was kind of thanking two guests that we had. And they were like, we hope to graduate to like full errands and full Corys. Like it was hilarious. But they have taken over a lot of the professional learning. I don't do it. And the reason why I don't do it is because everyone knows my agenda. And I came in with a reputation that was pretty intimidating. And I remember sitting with a school and they're like, nobody's listening to us. And I'm like, do you think it's because you're the vice principal and you're the principal and you're leading the learning? And they both were like, oh, I never thought about that. And I'm like, it is because you have a title that people don't understand, right? Brenna, see, I have people here. I'm talking. Not mine. So then, so I was thinking about, I said, well, this is what we did. And I just guide them. I'm like a coach on the side when they're like, I need something, I don't understand this piece. I find them the research paper or the text that can help them build their knowledge base, or I might connect them with somebody. But now that they're kind of part of my group, like they have access to my circle of friends who carry ridiculous knowledge. Like, it's all who you surround yourself with and who you elevate in those spaces. And for them, they've never been given the opportunity to lead learning, and they're killing it. Like, they're absolutely killing it. So it's kind of fun to watch. Like, you're just like a proud mama watching your little cubs go and lead learning, right?
I guess, I'm hearing you talk about building capacity and finding those platforms and those spaces and taking the strengths of people, finding them, and then finding ways for them to grow those and develop. And I think a big part that certainly this region is developing leaders, because there's no doubt about it. And I would say from a very short experience, the vice principal roles can be the worst one you have. You're not in charge of anything. At least when you're a teacher, you're in charge of your own classroom.
Yeah.
Principal, I think, was the best job I ever had in a school, because you get a chance to like do so many amazing things, and you have a whole team of people to support along the way. And so anyway, I was just thinking if you could talk a little bit about that capacity building and how you went about. I mean, you mentioned observation as one way to have a look at that, and finding those strengths in those different people. But how do you find ways to connect people's interests and strengths with the needs of the school and I guess maybe priorities is kind of a big word in the sense of that's prescribed, but to help them evolve the school community, and not just them, but parents and students and a variety of voices and stakeholders.
So I think when you're a new vice principal in a school, like it's good to know, like, you don't know what you're walking into. And I remember when I took the course, I'd be like, well, I'd look at the school improvement plan and I would see what the goals are. And then I would go out and look at the names and figure out who the people, like, but that's not really what you do. Like, like once you're in it, you realize, like, for me, relationships were at the forefront. And if you're doing a good job, you're actually not like standing in front of people. I think, like, it would be the best way to describe it. Like, you're finding ways to stand beside and elevate. In terms of like the families, like the extended family part, that's a part I'm still figuring out, because what I wanted to do when I first came in, I realized teachers send their kids out all the time. Like, it's insane. And literally in the first 2 months, I remember saying to my principal, like, I didn't realize my job would be all discipline. Like, that is not what I imagined my role to be. And then I'm like, nor do I want it to be. Like, that sucks. Like, I have to be the bad guy all the time in all of these stories of these children. And that's not the leadership. That's not why I came in to be a vice principal. And so that's why I was out in the building more. And then I made, like, and I did this when I taught too, where if I saw improvement in a student's attendance or improvement in a piece, I'd reach out to that family and let them know, because I know they got the first 5 calls they got of the year were all crap and they were negative and they were talking about their kid in a negative light, and the parents throw their hands up and then they disengage, and then how do you get them re-engaged? So I think this year I've spent a lot of time understanding our student community. And to be honest, like, that's, our school is 90% is probably even a low estimate Caucasian. And so our racialized population is very low. But what I've learned is the language is almost normalized, like the racial slurs and the negative terminology that kids carry and is normalized. And our students are just accepting it. And so I've really worked hard internally, I think. The other part I've learned is when kids come to secondary, like, parents don't want to really engage. They're like, they're in secondary, I'm out now, I don't need to do anything. Like, and we don't even have like a true school council, like a parent council. We only one administrator goes to the meeting because we won't have quorum if 2 of us go, because you always need to have half plus 1. So we, right, like, so we wouldn't even have it. So we have a really effective chair now who we're working alongside her to recruit parents to come in. But I think one conversation we had as an inclusive design team was, we need to have meetings off of school property. We need to take these conversations outside of the building, because some of these families have lived here, and when they've come into my office, like, to talk, they're like, I remember sitting here and this is where I got kicked out of the school and I got sent over to alternative education. So we have an offsite alternative education. And I thought, well, this is like historical trauma, right? So this is why they don't want to engage with their kid. It's because they had a negative experience in this school. And you could see them like uncomfortable. And then they can already feel the disposition of like your hierarchical position and then their lack of position in that conversation. So we've really been talking about how to move meetings, even the timing of the meetings, because when it's a bedroom community, parents are coming home at 6, 7 o'clock, and I don't want to come to school at 7:15 for a meeting where you're going to sit there and just throw stuff at them. Like, so the only time we've had success is when we did a chai and tea talk, or whatever they're calling them now. And our trustee came in and we had 6 parents shown up. Like, that's the highest number of secondary parents. And we're a school of like 880 kids. So we're trying to really think about how we move the meetings out of the building and outside of the structured school day too, or maybe within the school day, because some people are doing shift work starting at noon. So
that's really interesting. You talk about that. Your school and my school are very similar. Mine's elementary, and it's about a quarter the size, 200 kids. But it's a rural community, so it's like a bedroom community of Thunder Bay, if you want to call it that. But
yep.
We have incredible difficulty getting people to come to something unless it's a barbecue.
Yeah, you have to feed them.
Car washes are good.
Yeah.
But we had someone from the Center for Relationship-Based Education speaking the other night, and I managed to drag in 5 people, 2 of which were staff members. We have it's an interesting dynamic trying to engage the community, especially in elementary school, because I understand the secondary dynamic, but usually in elementary school, people are, they want to come to math night, they want to come to literacy night, and they want to come and sit and talk. And the other similarity is we're probably about, I would say, 90-10 as well. And for my school, though, the sad thing was racialized people were really invisible. They weren't seeing them at all, and a lot of other things. And we also, for the first time, just raised the pride flag this year. So a lot of the same kinds of struggles. And when Pam talks about raising somebody up, when I got to my school, I did a very similar thing. We were in the basement, so to speak, and I started looking around, and I'm like, who here, kind of knows what they're doing and has the strengths we're looking for. And then it was interesting to see some very strong people not living their strengths and not being the teachers and people they could be and the leaders they could be. That really surprised me. And so seeking them out and rekindling some relationships that I'd had from teaching either with people or knowing them in the board, and then starting to bolster them, support them, push them up, and then starting to put them in front of the group. And they've actually run, I think, two, at least two, maybe three PLCs now. I'm in my third year, all completely without me. Like, I'm just, yeah, you guys plan because I've got to be somewhere, and they do it, and they're amazing, and they keep pushing the ideas and thoughts, and but it's so unique to listen to your story, because I'm always kind of thinking about the same challenges. So.
Yeah, and I think to note, just so people don't misunderstand, when you say they planned and they ran it without you, Christy's very much involved in everything every day. So it's not like she's absolving herself of it.
No.
Because having your, as a leader, being present and being a co-learner in that space with your staff is really, I think, critical in terms of learning, but also leading from the side, or from the back even sometimes.
Yes.
So Pam, I have just another question. Thinking a little bit. This is harder. Last time we were all together in one room, so it was easier to bounce back.
It was so easy.
Never interviewing Pam. So part of your work provincially, and I'm using that kind of on a broad scope, because unofficially Pam has a lot of different roles around the province, with a lot of her colleagues, a lot of researchers, universities, school boards, and I say teacher, but also principal colleagues. And so you move in and out of those different roles depending, obviously, on the space you take. But I would gather I see you as pretty open and easy to develop a relationship with, because I find that you're very maybe not judgmental about things. Like, you just take people as they come, and then you kind of move forward from there. And so how have you found that? Because a big part of leading in the school is having strong community relations, strong relationships with maybe post-secondary, especially in high school, for research, or like, I've done some really great programs with faculty of educations in my school, and they brought students, and we've run some full year-long things. But how have you actually sought out those relationships, so that you as a school leader can enhance the student life in your school, maybe, or the teacher learning?
I honestly think that I have, like, and then this is probably, you're gonna laugh, and you know how it works, right? Like, I've literally stumbled into some of them, and sometimes it's about timing, and sometimes it's about a question I might ask. Sometimes it's my Twitter handle. Like, all of my relationships have, like, I remember when we first met and you were speaking, and I'm like, this is a familiar voice. Like, I've heard about you. And then I just came up to you, and like, I'm not shy. Like, I was like, I think you know my sister, and then you and I started talking, because back then you were in a provincial role. And I think for me, like, I'm not shy to compliment somebody. I'm not shy to ask a deeper question. I remember going to Danielle and Ruth's first session around the work they were doing with community leading. And we had just embarked on a math journey. And I was like, I feel like we need to connect. I think you can help me really leverage the learning in our board. And it was like an instant sistership. Like, it's not even a friendship, like, it bypassed friendship, and it went to, we're in this together. And I think I think people just see that in you as a leader. I don't even know how to articulate it, but the opportunities I've been afforded, the relationships that I have, like, but I feed those all the time too. Like, and I think that for me is always important. So just because I'm not in the role doesn't mean I've dropped all of those relationships. And this year would be a good example, because Ruth had submitted a proposal for funding for a conference, and she kept me included, even though she knew I wasn't in the lead role anymore. And then offered Kalinda and I a keynote, which I think we got, like, totally, I forgot we agreed to it. And then the publication came out and said, Pam and Kalinda are keynoting. And we were laughing. We're like, oh my God, did we agree to that? Like, how'd that happen? And so, but that's how I give back to that relationship with Ruth and Danielle, right? And for me, the relationship with Scholastic was a total accident. My friendship with Kalinda was, like, honestly fluke at the start. Like, we just were sitting in the same space. We were both questioning Scholastic like crazy and saying, what are you in this for? Like, what's in it for you? And we were hard on them. And then we realized, oh my gosh, they're actually going to give us space. Like, I'll do it if you do it. And then we were like BFFs from that day forward. And so all of those relationships that I have, like, they're still in tight now. Like, those are my sisters and brothers, and I take care of them. Like, even Nick, like, he's coming up to my school on Friday. Like, he doesn't have to, right? But in his role, he's coming in, and I'm showing him how we've kind of created some learning opportunities in our building, like not being in the role anymore and what that could look like. And yeah, and I think it's just important to maintain that relationship. And for me, it's always grounded in reciprocity. It's never a take, take, take. I've never been that person. In fact, maybe I think I give too much sometimes to those relationships because I just love the friendship or the relationship so much. And I still access that in my role because having them as leaders in whatever roles they have, like, it runs parallel to an administrative role where you aren't the ultimate power holder, but you have a little bit of power, and then you're trying to figure out how to leverage it, right? So for me, I don't know, I think, and I'm always, that's been my thing from day one, like, is relationships. It's been a strength, and definitely carry that forward. And you can see it, like, my first day on my job, a mom showed up with her daughter. She had been in this session, which I might have, I kind of pulled her into leading the learning with me. Like, I didn't do it in a good way. Like, I unconsciously brought her into the learning, and we were unpacking. I was getting annoyed with a learning group I was leading because they weren't, like, when people are engaging in conversations, but they're all surface conversations. So, like, they pretend that they know what they're talking about, but they're not really knowing what the power is playing out in the space. And so I was annoyed, and I said to the principal, like, I want to push them. And he's like, you push. And so we listened to the Julie Black, Jeannie Becker conversation with the Canada Reads, and it blew up on social media. And we did it in a way that we were talking about how power was playing out in that conversation and who had power over who. And I probably was a little naive. However, what I liked about it was Julie Black was defending a book that wasn't about her identity, but was about Canadian identity, whereas Jeannie Becker was defending a book that's directly connected to her identity. And so that whole power dynamic was playing out, right? Like, accomplice versus, like, lived experience, I guess. And it totally, this parent was in the space. And so she was like, but this is how we talk, like, we're passionate. Just because I get passionate about something doesn't mean I'm angry. And she's biracial. So that, it was interesting, right? So first day on the job as a VP, the mom walks into the school. I'm like, you live in Keswick? Like, I didn't even know where she lived. And she had brought me a bundle of tobacco, and her daughter had just transferred into our building from the art school that was south of it because she was tired of the commute. And in that moment was, like, grateful that I had pushed her to lead that learning and that she felt more confident, and then was offering me this tobacco to kind of look out for her daughter because she's biracial, coming into a heavily Caucasian, school, and making sure her daughter was safe. And, I think that speaks to the relationships that you don't even know you have. Here I kind of put her on the spot, and she could have easily been upset with me, but then use that as an opportunity to push people's thinking around how power and privilege plays out in spaces. And now as an advocate, right? And I felt so guilty. I literally went and found her and gave her a book with this big letter I'd written, how I didn't mean to do it that way, but how I appreciated her voice and how I think her voice elevated the learning for everybody in that space. And I can't speak to that identity because that's not mine. And how in that moment we were working as accomplices beside each other, really talking about Canadian identity instead of just a singular identity, right? It was interesting.
I'm just going to name some of the people's names you threw out who are friends of yours. So Dr. Ruth Beatty is a math professor in the Faculty of Education at Lakehead University and works under the Orillia campus. And she has been working for 10 years with First Nations and Métis communities throughout Ontario. And she is a researcher who focuses on working with communities on traditional things. I'm going to use the word things, I can't think of a better word, but like basket making or beading or medallion making or making nets, for instance. So a variety of things, but then pulling the math out of it, but not losing the cultural and the spiritual space that math lives, I guess, and then connecting it to the mathematics. So it's quite interesting because language is part of that, culture is part of that, community is almost all of that. And then the educators and the students are super engaged in their learning, but it also is a way to colonize the classroom space. And then Danielle Blair is one of her, I'll use the word accomplices. She was a provincial math lead, and she lives out of the Really region. Glenda Klein, I think, is with the Grand Erie board. Is that where she's with? As Pam has a mouthful for supper.
Yeah, Upper Grand.
And okay, so she had coached with that board.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. And then Nick Bertrand is an education officer with the Indigenous Education Office in the K to 12. So Nick, I think, came out of the board in Hamilton.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, whatever that board's called.
Same as Troy, probably.
No, Troy's from the other side, near Belleville.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we didn't mention Troy, but Troy Miracle's another guy we work with too. So there is definitely, I think, maybe part of it's age, but part of it is getting out on social media, reading stuff, following videos, checking out people's YouTube channels, going to conferences if you can, or logging into some of the provincial meetings that are offered, or checking out webinars.
If you're already a principal, vice or principal, or you're an associate member, OPC often hosts some chats, and there's some interesting, and some of the stories that are on there are worth listening to. Their Twitter feed chats.
CanEd is another one.
Yeah, CanEd's another one.
So there's a lot of different places where you can start to build those networks if you're moving, maybe out of your school or your board, but into administration and looking for some growth for yourself outside of your board or outside of your school. And I find that challenges sometimes are with the smaller schools or smaller boards where you don't have large diversity, and maybe even the different complexities, I suppose, from small schools, because they bring different challenges than larger schools and big boards. So did anyone have any questions for Pam? We have about 10 minutes left. We're nearing the end of our course, and I know, Pam, we normally try to have you in at the beginning of the course. But certainly people have been working fast and furious, because this is the condensed version where it's basically a module a week.
7 weeks.
And people are just moving.
That's crazy.
We're trying to keep up. We're doing a great job.
It's hard to keep up. It's busy too, and June is busy for everybody. But certainly the quality of the work of these individuals here with us tonight, but the other ones, is extremely high, and really, really interesting to see the practicums in the wide variety, because everyone's done practical work already at this point.
Yes. For Lisa and Tanya, who kind of joined us a little bit later, Pam's just been talking to us about transitioning into that role of VP. Those are some, if you missed that part, it's really interesting how she navigates that space and leverages people and gets things moving. And I think, your mission may be very different than what Pam's was or is at her school. However, we're all, I think, trying to do a similar, trying to look at the strengths of the school and figure out how some of the best that we can do to get student success out, right? And that success is also defined in multiple different ways. I think we've looked at that through the course. We've given you some things to think about in terms of how we measure success and what's important in structure, and then how we build collaborative communities. But Pam's done a great job really summing up some of those big ideas. So if you missed something, you just want to ask a question about that transition or leveraging those we already talked about in the course, give her
We're almost done.
You just unmute yourself if you need a question.
Hi, Pam.
Hi.
Thanks for being with us tonight. I just have a question regarding equity work. And when you are trying to implement equity work in a school community, but you don't have the full backing of administration, or they're not buying into equity work, what type of strategies would you recommend?
It's a great question. Change the system would be my first one.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. I think that's probably more the norm than what I'm experiencing right now. I think as a VP, like, you can only operate within what with what is within your own control, right? And how you lead can be grounded in those pieces of equity. And then one strategy you could use is if you have, and I've done this before when I was in the lead role, you have like a teacher in your building who is really strong in understanding how equity can make the student succeed in that classroom space. Work alongside that teacher and then almost use that as a platform of, oh my gosh, look at how it's moving this group of kids in this space. Imagine if we tried to do it, say it was in English, like I'm a secondary person, right? So say it was in English, like imagine how that could really shift thinking in history. And maybe we can get some co-teaching opportunities together. And so I would always say start small. You're never going to shift the whole staff. But I would say work with the teachers and then find ways to get them to share. But you probably will encounter that block. And I think the best way to do it is get the wins where you can get them. And it just might be in the classroom spaces and not in your staff meeting forums or in larger spaces, right?
And the reality
Interesting.
of that, Pam, just to add to that, is whether you're a principal, vice principal, superintendent, teacher, wherever you are in terms of the educational side of it, you're going to run into people who want to walk with you and people who are willing to try, and you'll run into resistors. So the strategies really aren't that different, whether you're working at it from the inside out or whether you're working at it from the outside in. Because as a principal, you can't tell someone to be equitable.
Right.
You tell them that, right? So you have to find those ways without looking at, like, you have favorites, but finding ways to build upon the strengths of those that maybe are already doing it, or highlighting key pieces, or bringing people of like-minded together. One of my karate colleagues has a phrase called "feed the hungry," and really it's involving putting your energy and utilizing strengths of people who are wanting to build those strengths and enhance those. And you will have learners who are just like picking up stuff, and those people just, doesn't matter what you throw at them, they're like, "Ooh, tell me more," and then off they go, right? And then there's others that struggle to keep up because they're quite happy just the way things are.
One of the best teachers definitely is when, exactly as you say, when a space shifts and you can see the change and the feel of the class or the school or the success and the community building. Like it's quite noticeable when someone's really working from that space. And you're right. If you can push that as an example and people start going, what's that person doing over there? I find that also, that builds that capacity pretty quickly. People start asking questions at least.
Well, and in high school, I think but little kids as well, they see where inequities lie and they call it. And they know when it's safe to call it, and they know when it's not safe to call it to that space, but maybe they acknowledge it somewhere else. Because, everyone takes English, and if they're all engaged in English and everyone's good and everyone's coming to English class and everyone's learning, but they go to other classes or other teachers, and all of a sudden they're getting sent to the office. I had a conversation with a teacher one time, and then we had a lot of support because every day I was getting this teacher's kids, every period, itinerant teacher. And I'm like, look, I'm a school principal. I can go do your job if I need to do your job, but then I don't need you here to do your job. I'm not being paid to do your job and my job. So how can I help you learn how to be more effective in your job? Because I'm sure everything you take all this care and time to plan every day, it must be very frustrating when you're not able to get into it and you have to talk to me every day. And so we had that conversation pretty frankly, actually. But then we put some support sometimes with some colleagues and some coaching, and so everyone did some work. And over the period of about a year and a half, things really did turn around, because this person really passionately wanted to do good things with kids, but completely had no skills on how to do that yet. And newer teacher, trying to figure it out. So, sometimes you just got to call it for what it is. And then in the leadership role, always support it though. This is what I'm noticing. How can I help? And acknowledge they must be like, he was frustrated with the fact that he planned such great things, but didn't get past the first 2 minutes any single day in class before his whole class got put. And then he had to go 40 minutes later to the next class, and then it happened again. Like, he kept coming back though. I give him kudos for that, because he could have called in sick at any time, but he didn't. He showed up for work every single day. So, my role was to figure out how to help him be more effective in his role. And what he had, his strength, was he cared, and he cared a lot. He just didn't have the tools yet on how to be effective in his teaching role. So sometimes
I think
what he is maybe being not caring is not about that. It might just be that they don't have that tool to fill that yet.
I think we have to. I'm noticing the gym has completely emptied out, so I'm pretty sure I have to go now. And I have to go pick up my other daughter who's at dance.
Well, it is almost 9 o'clock, so.
Okay, perfect.
All right, well, we want to do our official thank you.
We can't thank you enough, Pam. It's so good to see you face to face, and so good to chat. And I learn as much as anybody listening and talking with you. So I really, really appreciate your time. And thank you again.
Thanks for having me again. And
Thank
we
you.
can continue the conversation like on Twitter. I'm on it quite a bit. So if you have any questions or
on the invitation so people can look you up.
And at the same time, like this conversation, it could be our first conversation, like, and Denise and Christy do a good job of like connecting you with people who can help and guide your journeys, right? So there's always like you meet everybody on your path for a reason. So feel free to reach out if you need any support, and I can keep sharing all the craziness that I endure every day. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, that's
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you, everyone. We'll
Thank
be
you.
recording this if you want to revisit any of it. So I'll put it on our little YouTube channel we have after I download it, and then it'll be available there for viewing. Okay?
Thank you.
Can I ask you a question, ladies, before you go? Okay. I have a question because I'm getting to the end of like everybody else with my course and stuff, and for my practicum and everything, I'm just looking at like the final things that need to be done, like they have to be signed off and everything by your principal and things. My question to you is, my principal is not a certified principal. My director principal is a principal, but he's a principal in the States. And then, so my next question is, the next principal that I can ask to sign off that I've worked for that knows me is just like 20 minutes away in a different community. Will that work?
Yeah, I would think so. I would have maybe a conversation with your current principal and this other principal to talk about work, like have your debrief meeting.
I have had that conversation already, and they both said that they don't have a problem like signing that I completed everything in my practicum and my principal hours, and I've done all that. But they said if I need to have a signature on top of that from an Ontario principal, then that's okay too.
Yeah, and you can always get both of them to comment on your sheet. I mean, you can. It's a Word document, so you can make it bigger. And
yes.
Put both people in and have them sign it, and then just put their names on the front. That's fine.
Okay, and one more question. When I was doing my, like just getting all my stuff together, because today was treaty day at our work, so I didn't have to go, so I was doing schoolwork all day. But anyways, my question for you is, okay, just so I'm understanding it right then, I have like I'll have my 125 hours of like through discussions and posts and research and all that. And then I have another 20 hours that I've worked as acting principal, more than that I can put on there besides. And then I'm going to put in that I did my practicum hours. That's another 60 hours of practicum, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the way it works though, the 125 hours log, it goes into the course assignments box, just
yes.
the PQP2.
Yes.
You send to the PQP, is it pqppracticums.edu
Mm-hmm.
and C Woods, and that's where you send your whole practicum once you're finished everything. So that includes the 60 and the 20, but it just has to be 60 total. So it could just be 40 and 20.
Oh, okay. So then I would just have to do 40 on my practicum if I already have the 20 volunteer, not all hours.
Observing, yeah. So
okay.
It's like part 1, part 2, and part C. And C is your practicum. So it sits separately than the part 1 and the part 2.
Okay. And like I've been doing that like pretty much since I started the program in January. So what do I just put the hours like from May till June, or do I put my whole hours from my start of PQ1 and part 2?
No, you just put PQP2 hours in your PQP2 assignment box.
Okay. Okay.
Practicum hours with your practicum log for your practicum.
Okay. Because I've had the opportunity to be doing it all the way through. So it's been good.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. Great. Thanks.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Or you have us
You
here?
did.
I think I'm good now. I was just panicky because I was thinking, now what am I going to do? I have nobody to sign off and I've done all the work. So
Oh,
I'm
yeah,
glad.
you're good.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Tanya, did you have a question? Hold on, let me unmute you. Oh, maybe turn up your volume?
Volume?
I'm not getting a little nice. Hold on. Mute. Chat. No. I can see. Can you see the chat box on the bottom, Tanya? Wait. Oh, now it's in the middle. If you want to type a little message there on the bottom, there's that little chat bubble. Because for some reason we can't hear you. Little thing moving. Oh, it's her audio. Okay.
I want to go to Joseph. I want to go to everybody.
Yeah. There you go. Oh, what is the deadline? So the deadline for the practicum is around Christmas. Like the end of November, and then certainly if you need a bit longer, you can hand it in a bit later. So that's why we use the word ish.
Why isn't it?
Okay, so I'm going to just open up something here for you guys. Just 1 second here.
Hold on.
Give me a minute here. Oops. Why is this not shrinking? Nope.
I went through that 47 pages again today, and it was helpful because I read it once already, but just to get back on track to make sure I've covered everything with the, I think it's in module 2.
Okay, can you see my screen that says PQP practicum?
No.
Okay, how do I do that? I go to share.
There you go.
Share screen. Share PowerPoint.
Yes.
Okay, so in here, this is located in the content section of
Yeah.
our course.
It's a
And
PowerPoint.
so it's a PowerPoint. I would suggest you download it so that you can go back to it and see everything you have to do. But in here are all the little headings at a minimum, but it can include more if you want, of the final report write-up, the 2,500 words, the 4 pieces that are required for submission. And then the paperwork's in here again if you're not sure. This is the piece, the practicum leadership evaluation, that you need to get filled out and signed by you and your mentor. And then in here are due dates, which is roughly 3 months following the completion of part 2, skipping over summer because there's no school there. So 3 months of school time. And then they have, once you're finished, put it in one email and attach all the attachments in there to pqppracticums.educ@lakeheadu.ca and cwoods@lakeheadu.ca. And Colleen Woods is the one who will be sending it to, how do I make this bigger again? She'll be the one who's sending it to
OCT.
once we assess it. So she keeps track of things, or if she notices something came in and we haven't checked in a week, she'll send us a quick little note to say, hey, there's 3 practicums in there. Can you guys mark them? Like, especially things that might come in August. We might not be checking every day.
Don't put them in the course link email.
Yeah, but make sure you send them to those particular emails. And then for sure that we'll get them. And that's where they come. So.
And if you run into issues, let us know, and we work with you. So.
Yeah, just send us a quick chat. It's probably the quickest way, again, through WhatsApp or to our actual emails, not to the email. Yeah. Okay, anything else? Is Tanya typing? Yes.
No, it just went so fast.
This is the crazy time.
The number.
Oh, okay. Crystal, type in our phone numbers.
This is I'll put my name first.
It's also on the very first news clip. If you go to the announcements page, it's the very first one that we sent out. So everything is listed in there. But here it is again. 0632 6787. Or you can text us. You don't have to WhatsApp us. Just text us. Sometimes I set up phone calls with students. I have a student right now who's sending stuff in. So I had a chat with her the other day by phone at 2:20 when she had a break. So, we're happy to give you a call.
Text, WhatsApp, email.
Sometimes we give job advice, not job advice, but I did some prep interview
Interview
work
coaching,
with,
yeah.
I did interview coaching for an hour, maybe a month ago with someone, and she successfully made it into the pool. So we kind of offer like full post service for you.
Yeah. We're around.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've interviewed a lot, and we've certainly been interviewed a lot over the years. So,
Like, how detailed do we have to do, like, for our practicum hours? Like, is it the same thing as our log? We kind of put the date, and then we put the activity, and like, how much detail do we have to go into?
That's all. Date and activity.
yep. And then
Okay.
what you can do is, if you want to do a long reflection, if you're a prose writer, you can just write a long reflection. But I am not. I like short nonfiction-y kind of writing, so I do a column: date, activity, reflection, small paragraph, and then the next date, activity. Oh, and hours. But don't forget the hours, because you have to have your total hours running. So
Yes.
it's your choice how you want to write it. Just make sure all the information's there.
Because I was thinking, like, reflections, would it be okay, like, if we did week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4, instead of doing it every day? Because
Whatever works for you.
in our post, it says reflect in these little things. I never reflect in there. I just did it, like, on as a journal, like,
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
okay, because were we supposed to reflect in there?
No, it's just to help your own learning. Be
Okay.
your-
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay. All right.
All
Thanks,
right.
folks.
Thanks
Thank
very
you,
much.
Tanya.
Good night.
Good
Night.
night.